Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. YouTubes. I don't know why I had to say it that way. YouTubes. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Alana, and I pretty much review books on this channel. There's nothing like a good sit down book review, getting into getting into the weeds of what's in the books that we read. So today's book review is To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. I finished this book back in April, May, March. I might have read this book in March. I finished this book several weeks ago, and let me hold on. These are books for the last video because I sit down and I film like 2-3 videos at a time because I got other things to do in my life. I got books falling over. So my copy of To the Lighthouse is annotated to oblivion because just there was so much to dissect. And so it took me a while to go back through all of my annotations, flush out some of the annotations, and then from there outline my review. I like to handwrite them out and then I type them up. And that took me quite a bit of time because when I have a book like this that I picked up on, in which I picked up a lot on, when I have a book like this in which I pick up on quite a bit of things, I like to let it marinate and sit and percolate. And then I got to stop moving like this because I slept wrong and my back hurts because I'm older than I look. People think I'm in my 20s and I'm very flattered by that. Thank you. You know what they say about black don't crack. Anyway, so it took me a while to put this one together. So I'm not going to belabor this any longer. Again, this will be a long review. Not quite as long probably as my Outlander review, but this is going to be lengthy. So get some tea, get a snack, put your feet up, do some crafts and wash the dishes, have this playing in the background, and we are going to dive into this. You guys know me, I like to start with a quote. Strife, divisions, differences of opinion, prejudices twisted into the very fiber of being. So in To the Lighthouse, we have Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay and their 8 children who spend their summers on the Isle of Skye, which is in Scotland, surrounded by family and friends who are also present. Let's backtrack. 8 churns? I'm not children, chillins. That's too much. She went through labor 8 times. My girl. No, ma'am. Unless it's like the 1700s and I need all them chillins to work a farm, ain't no way 8 bodies are coming from this body. I'm just saying. That's too much. To the Lighthouse provides an intimate look at family life. And as time passes, we see how death and war, this is going to take, the war that's alluded to, I believe would be World War probably 1. Looking at the publication date. Yeah, this was published in 1927, so World War 1. And how war impacts family and their friends. Woolf explores themes of erosion, how do we know others, art and immortality, light and darkness within people. So Woolf includes a lot of imagery also about the struggles and grief that she dealt with / experienced in her own life. At its core, I would say that To the Lighthouse is really about how we interact with people while tackling the question, can we really know other people? Woolf presents the case that people will always be abstract, but we can glean enough information from the people that we interact with and know to help us understand enough about who they are. And here's a quote. And yet she knew knowledge and wisdom were stored in Mrs. Ramsay's heart. How then, she had asked herself, did one know one thing about people sealed as they were? In this particular scene, there is a family friend named Lily who is pressing her face against Mrs. Ramsay's knee as if that physical contact is going to kind of maybe transmit some hidden understanding and knowledge about who Mrs. Ramsay is, and this pull and this draw that Mrs. Ramsay has over other people. this is really, I found this to be an interesting image because physical touch is definitely a way in which we know people. When you are so acquainted with a person or even intimate with a person in which physical contact is appropriate, there's definitely an intimacy there. But even that level of intimacy through physical touch, you still can never just break that barrier of really getting into somebody's head and knowing everything about them and how they're thinking and what they're processing. There is nothing that will make us omniscient when it comes to understanding other people. It's always going to be abstract. And again, there's going to be a lot of quotes in here, so bear with me. But like I've said, I like quotes because it's receipts. I'm not pulling this out of thin air. But this was one way of knowing people, she thought, to know the outline, not the detail. As soon as I read that line in this book, I immediately thought of Rachel Cusk's Outline trilogy. And so I've only read Outlander. I've only read Outline. I will be reading Transit very soon, and then I'll probably read Kudos next year. But I was immediately reminded of the first book, Outline, and I had to get up and get my book because I knew exactly the quote that it reminded me of. And here, this is the quote. While he talked, she began to see herself as a shape, an outline, with all the detail filled in around it, while the shape itself remained blank. And Rachel Cusk in that particular book, I mean, I'm assuming that the other two are kind of going to have very similar themes since they're all really one. It's really a trilogy, so it's just a continuation of, the narratives. It's how the main character persona, how she sees herself, how other people see her, is shaped by her different roles, whether that be her life as a teacher, her family, the separation of her family, going through a separation with her husband, how she sees herself as a mother, and how do you combine all of these things to shape the person. So I was just really fascinated by that immediate connection that I made. And so one thing that I'm probably going to do is, now that that's in my mind, this connection between Woolf and Cusk, I think Cusk may have done this deliberately. It was just so blatant. I was like, no, this lady has definitely read Virginia Woolf. When I go into Transit and Kudos by Rachel Cusk, I'm going to kind of read it through the lens of Virginia Woolf and just see how much more I pick up on and play around with that idea in the future. But that's just a sidebar. So the way that To the Lighthouse is structured, it's a novel in 3 parts. The first part is called The Window, the second part is called Time Passes, and the third part is called The Lighthouse. I particularly want to focus in this review on The Window because it ties in again nicely with this theme of knowing others. To know others, we have to observe them, and observation is something that Woolf definitely plays around with here. And we have another quote. It seemed to her such nonsense inventing differences when people, heaven knows, were different enough without that. The real differences, she thought, standing by the window, ... The sentence does, or the paragraph does go on, but what I particularly wanted to focus on was that it's not a coincidence that Mrs. Ramsay here is standing by a window while she's musing over the ways in which people differ. The window here represents the observation of people and how people interact with each other. The window is really, though, a barrier. Even though it's glass and it's see-through, we can view things, but that barrier still acts like as a medium of separation. Again, one can observe, even draw conclusions about what they're observing, and those observations and conclusions be accurate, but it's never going to lend to any type of omniscient understanding about what it is you're actually seeing and who it is that you're actually viewing. And then this leads into another quote. It was painful to be reminded of the inadequacy of human relationships, that the most perfect was flawed and could not bear examination. And again, that particular word, examination, alludes to this watching of others through a window. In a way, we all see people through our own lenses, which is, again, a barrier, a glass, our own perceptions, and mentally assess others through our own perspectives. The Ramseys, in a lot of ways, are seemingly perfect from the outside in. But when you get how the children feel about their parents, their father in particular, how Lily feels about Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, how other characters feel about Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, that image of perfection is that it's very flawed. It's a facade. And the lighthouse is, it's called To the Lighthouse because there is a physical lighthouse in this book, but the lighthouse also serves as a way to represent this duality. So there is light in all of us, but there's definitely shadow as well. And you really just kind of have to think about, how a lighthouse literally operates. So you have a beam, a light that is shining and moving around to illuminate what it touches. However, whatever it's illuminating, there's going to be shadow that's created because of this light. Thus, of course, creating areas of darkness. The same applies to people. So people, we're multifaceted and complex. And we really see this, I think, in particular with Mr. Ramsey. He is kind of a jerk. Not gonna lie. He's a jerk. And he has this type of personality in which his children, his wife, have to walk on eggshells because you never know when his personality, or his mood rather, is going to switch up. And so they call it when somebody has blundered. Oh no, somebody said something wrong, and they go back and, did I say it? What did I say? How could you have interpreted it that way? It gets twisted. He is, in a way, a kind of a ticking time bomb. You just never know when his mood is going to shift. I think we may all know personalities types like that, where some people, you just have to walk on eggshells around them. But even though he's moody and I didn't care for him as a character, he's rather unlikable. There are times when, because Virginia Woolf shifts perspectives in this book, again, it's a stream of consciousness writing style, so we get multiple characters' point of views, and so we do get Mr. Ramsey's point of view quite a few times. He's rather vulnerable and insecure, and those particular flaws within his personality lend a softness to what is harsh about him. Another quote: "One forgot the little agitations, the flush, the pallor, some queer distortion, some light or shadow, which made the face unrecognizable for a moment." Like I said earlier, obviously it's called To the Lighthouse. We've got a lighthouse in this book. There's a beach nearby. There is a lot of beach and wave imagery. Woolf purposely draws the reader's attention to the waves as the waves come in contact with the shoreline. And this contact of water and land it really symbolizes people's temporary and fleeting space and time. So To the Lighthouse also explores this question of erosion, more specifically, how quickly the people in your life can vanish. And I'm going to go into that a little bit later, because that also goes into Virginia Woolf's own familial background. So here's a quote: "The land dwindling away, the little island seemed pathetically small, half swallowed by the sea." It's this imagery of the waves, this steady beating of the waves on the shore, on the sand, whittling away at things, whittling away at land. And some personalities are like that. You could view Mr. Ramsey from this is coming to me. You could view Mr. Ramsey from that lens. He has such a domineering personality that he just kind of wears you down over time. But also how grief wears people down. How, things like death and and the grief that happens after that just wear you down over time. There is their vacation home at one point is neglected, and how that space and time, that space that passes through after the war period, and how the family the family changes with who and who is no longer with the family through life or death, how that's its own type of erosion, and you see this dilapidation of things crumbling and falling apart. That was ad-libbed. I hope that made sense. An interesting question that Woolf poses. So I'm going to kind of leave erosion behind, leave how do we know others behind, and go into this theme of art and immortality. So Lily and Mr. Ramsay are the two characters that are used to ask this question. What does it mean for one to obtain immortality through one's life work, and what happens when one's art is being viewed by others? So Mr. Ramsay has written, I want to say one, maybe two notable works that were given high praise. And then Lily paints. I mean, her art is not on a grand scheme. She's really painting for herself. And so Woolf is posing this question of what happens when that is being consumed by other people. And can you ever achieve full immortality through publications, through writing or art? And Shakespeare is alluded to a lot in this book. And so there is this quote that says that even a rock will really outlive Shakespeare, which is a huge statement to make because, I mean, Shakespeare was writing for late 1400s, early 1500s, and we're still talking about Homeboy. And this kind of creates an existential crisis between the creator and their created pieces. Can a person ever really achieve, no matter how renowned their work is, full immortality after they're gone through whatever it is that they've created? He must be assured that he too lived in the heart of life, was needed not here only, but all over the world. And then we have the second quote. This one's alluding to Lily. But it had been seen, it had been taken from her. This man had shared something profoundly with her, something profoundly intimate. And so another character, saw a piece of art that Lily was painting, and she felt rather exposed. I think that Woolf is really asking this question about herself. And she's really giving the reader she's putting herself in a very vulnerable place between her and the reader, because she's doubting herself. She's doubting her writing. She's doubting her space as a writer, how she's perceived as a writer, which is, it's a bit dramatic, isn't it? A bit of dramatic irony, because Virginia Woolf is considered one of the greatest writers of all time. But rather, there are plenty of people who don't care for Virginia Woolf's work, but she is taught across the world in English courses, in literature courses. So, but how she would, there's no way she could have known that, just how influential her work would end up being as she was writing these novels. And not only novels, but essays as well. So it is really fascinating to think that I really enjoy Virginia Woolf's work. This is the second novel of her that I've read. I also have read a collection of her nonfiction essays, and I get it. I'm picking up what she's putting down. That she could really just have that level of insecurity. It's kind of humbling, because what all of us, I think, in some way, shape, or form, have doubted what it is that we're doing, or our life's work, or our careers, and the decisions that we made. Woolf's work, in a way, how could she not feel vulnerable about putting out literature like this? Because her work is very personal to her. She alludes to a lot of her own trauma that she experienced. And I think the second quote in particular, the one about Lily and her art being seen, harkens to how one's art is really a reflection of yourself. And what happens when people start to look at that reflection? They're starting to consume your art. And this really vulnerable place that puts the creator of the art in. Which is a nice segue, because I'm going to use that to kind of lead into what in this novel in particular alludes to the things that were difficult in Virginia Woolf's life. And I'm going to talk about in particular 3 major events. So, family deaths. Woolf lost her father through cancer, and her mother and her sister also passed away all within a short time frame, and this was devastating to her. So there are I want to say there are 2 or 3 instances that I caught on in which other characters in this novel had fathers that passed away through various forms of cancer. And there are characters in this book that pass away. So if you read this book, or if you've read this book, there are, you would want to pay attention to any time that Virginia Woolf mentions the number 3. So especially when it comes to ships, and she's talking about ships sinking or ships sailing. So, and there's a very short sentence, 3 had sunk. She is alluding to these 3 deaths in her own family that were devastating to her. She also mentions institutionalization. So Woolf, it's also well known that, or common knowledge, that Virginia Woolf struggled with mental health issues, and she had mental illness. I don't know if people know exactly what it was. It's been alluded to. Maybe it was bipolar, or I don't know if schizophrenia, but Virginia Woolf did suffer from mental illness and was institutionalized several times. And you really see a decline in her mental health after these deaths that occurred in her family. She briefly mentions how being locked away leaves gaps in one's life. And here's a quote: "For how would you like to be shut up for a whole month at a time, and to have no letters or newspapers, and to see nobody, if you were married, not to see your wife, not to know how your kids were?" And I found that to be a very sad quote, and it happens very early on in this book, within the first maybe 10 to 12 pages. If that, let's be specific. That's why I've got all these markers here. Lies, it happens on page 7. So she's providing this commentary on what it's like to be separated from society, locked away from society, locked away from those in your life who you care about and who care about you, and just to be siloed, and what that does to a person mentally. It's a bit ironic, isn't it? And then lastly, we know that Woolf took her own life. So there's more dramatic irony, because she's alluding to drowning and sinking in water. And that is how she took her own life. She drowned herself. I found that imagery probably to be the most haunting of all, because you're just like, you just feel bad for this woman. Like, but clearly she was going through. She seemed to be standing up to the lips in some substance, to move and float and sink in it. Yes, for the waters were unfathomably deep. Into them had spilled so many lives. So that is pretty much where I'm going to wrap up. Put this down. I really enjoyed To the Lighthouse. Woolf really does a fantastic job portraying the complexities of family dynamics and how difficult it is to understand others. I think that's something that we can all relate to. Also, To the Lighthouse, I think even more so than more so than Mrs. Dalloway, gives the reader more insight into Virginia Woolf's mind and about her own struggles with family loss, mental health, and her own legacy as a writer. So, and one thing that I admire about Virginia Woolf is how she writes. I always was before I started reading Virginia Woolf, we did study Virginia Woolf briefly in high school, my senior year. And at that time, I just couldn't understand her. I had a difficult time understanding her poetry in particular. And now, being older, I'm able to read her and understand her. Her writing is, I like to call it ethereal, and it's very evocative. And what she's really a master of is stream of consciousness. Is she the first author to write stream of consciousness like this? No. But she has her own style with it. it is seamless the way that she shifts from one character's thoughts to another character's thoughts. You also see this in Mrs. Dalloway, how as Mrs. Dalloway is running errands before this party that's going to be taking place that evening, how Virginia Woolf uses imagery or the characters walking and she sees, I don't know, I'm going to make something up, a tree. And then this tree leads her on to think about something else. And it's so seamlessly done that in some ways you don't even realize it's happening. And you're like, oh, wait a minute, the point of view just shifted. And you don't miss it. It's just flawless. And I think that's just, she just has the gift to do that. You either got it or you don't. And clearly Woolf had it. I know that a lot of people don't like Virginia Woolf. And I can see why. I can see why she's frustrating. And again, you know, some people, you're not going to get on with everybody. You're not going to get on with every author, and that's fine. I just so happen to be a fan, and I like to read one Woolf novel a year. So this was my Woolf for the year. I will be reading her books in publication order. I think next up would be Orlando. Yeah, and I think some of her latest novels, The Waves and The Years in particular, I've heard are some of the most challenging to read. So I'm working my way up to those, of course, in publication order. That is all I have today. I rated this book a 4.5 out of 5. And I really, 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 really enjoyed it. And I'm chuffed, as the Brits say, chuffed. I like that word, so I have adopted it. That I have made this connection between Rachel Cusk and Virginia Woolf. And I think that Outline by Rachel Cusk, just the first book, and To the Lighthouse would be really, really good companion reads. Have you read Virginia Woolf? Are you a Virginia Woolf friend? I know two of my bookish friends already, Elizabeth with The Literary Princess and Christy from Dostoevsky in Space, are not Virginia Woolf fans. I think that's fine. Please, I would actually like to know why. Because I like to hear opposing views about, you know, what you like and what you don't like, because it's boring if we all like the same thing. It keeps it spicy when we don't all like the same thing. So are you a Virginia Woolf fan? Have you read To the Lighthouse? What themes did you pick up on? Did you pick up on some of the same things that I picked up on? And if you're a Virginia Woolf fan, what is your favorite Woolf novel? I would like to know. I'm going to wrap this up. My throat is dry. Gonna get some water. And if you would like to follow me on Instagram, my link is below. My blog is below if you want to read my written reviews for everything that I post, or all of my book reviews here on YouTube. Don't forget to like, subscribe, give me a thumbs up, because it makes the algorithm know that you like what you're seeing, and so then it helps your girl out. It's free. Subscribe, it's free. And I will see you in the next one. A book haul, because I can't stop buying books and I have no regrets. I will see you in the next one. Bye.